One wrong move, and the book of the law would be lost forever. A simple priest cleaning a forgotten temple discovered a hidden room. Inside was a scroll nobody knew still existed. He brought it to the king, but after reading it, the king tore his clothes in complete horror. But to understand what was in that book and how he found it, we must first go back to the beginning of Hilkiah's story. The temple in Jerusalem had stood for many, many years. Inside its walls were rooms that had not been opened in a long time. Dust covered the floors. For years, kings before this one had let the temple fall apart, piece by piece, year by year, until much of it looked like a building nobody cared about anymore. Hilkiah was the high priest. Every day he walked through the giant temple halls. He knew every stone. He knew where the doors were stuck and where the roof leaked. But even he did not know that somewhere inside those walls, something was waiting. Something had been lost for so long that nobody even knew it was gone. Then things started to change. One ordinary morning while Hilkiah was walking through the outer court, the heavy temple gate creaked open. He heard the stomp of boots. He turned around, and there were royal guards, their swords shining in the sun. Behind them walked the king of Judah. His name was Josiah. He was still quite young, but he had a face that looked very serious. His father had been a wicked king who loved idols and hated the laws of God. One night, soldiers turned against that king inside his own palace, and by morning, he was dead. The people gathered in the courtyard the next day and set a crown on the head of his son, a boy of only 8. The crown slipped sideways on his small head, standing alone in front of a crowd far older than he was. Josiah grew up watching his country fill up with fake gods and altars built on hilltops. He saw the temple falling down, and it made his heart ache. He did not want to be like his father. He wanted to do what was right. Josiah walked up to the high priest. He did not look at the broken walls like they were just a building. He looked at them like they were a mistake that needed to be fixed. He called his helper, a man named Shaphan. "Go to Hilkiah," the king said. "Tell him to take the money the people brought to the temple, use it to pay the builders, the carpenters, and the stone masons. Buy the best wood and the strongest stone. The house of the Lord must be made perfect again." Shaphan took the king's message and crossed the city to the temple gates. He found Hilkiah counting coins near the entrance and gave him every word exactly as the king had said it. Hilkiah called for the treasurers at once, and the silver that had sat untouched in storage chests for years was carried out and weighed into the hands of the builders waiting outside. The work began. It was loud and busy. Hammers banged against old, hard stone. Workers climbed onto the high roof, balancing on beams that creaked under their weight. They pushed open heavy doors that had been locked since before Josiah was born, the hinges screaming from years of rust. They swept out years of dirt and pulled out pieces of wood that were rotting away, carrying basket after basket of broken debris out through the gates and dumping it in growing piles outside the walls. Hilkiah walked behind them, watching everything. He stopped at one wall, where new stone had just been set beside the old, pressing his hand against it to test if the mortar had dried. He moved on to a stack of fresh timber and counted the beams against what was written in his ledger. He was busy, but he was also calm. He just thought he was helping to fix a building. He had no idea he was actually walking toward the most important discovery in the history of his people. Day after day, the workers cleared out more rooms. They pulled down old shelving thick with cobwebs. They scraped years of grime off the floors with iron tools, the scraping sound echoing through the halls. They were deep inside the temple now, in a part of the building where no light ever reached. Rooms that had not seen a lamp in generations. The air was so dusty it made them cough, and more than once a worker had to step back out into the courtyard just to breathe clean air before returning to the task. One afternoon, a worker moved a heavy, broken beam out of the way, grunting with the effort, dragging it across the floor with a long, scraping sound. Behind it was a small, hidden storage room. It was dark and felt very lonely, the kind of room a person could walk past 100 times and never once notice the door. Hilkiah walked inside to check the progress. He held his lamp out in front of him, the small flame barely pushing back the darkness. He moved past broken jars stacked against the wall, careful not to knock them over. He moved his lamp lower, and the light hit something lying on the floor.
Before we continue, these videos takes many hours. If you could please like and subscribe and comment which country you are watching this from.
It was not a stone or a piece of wood. It was a scroll made of old, dry parchment. It was tied with a string that looked like it would turn to dust if he breathed on it too hard. He reached out and picked it up. His hands shook. He had never seen a scroll this old. He carefully untied the string and unrolled it just enough to see the first lines. His eyes went wide. He gasped so loud the workers stopped their hammering and looked toward the doorway. It was the Book of the Law, the very words that God had given to Moses on the mountain. It had been sitting there in the dark, buried under years of dirt, forgotten by everyone. Hilkiah tucked the scroll under his arm and ran. He did not walk. He ran straight through the temple halls, past startled workers, out through the courtyard, until he found Shaphan near the gate. "I have found the Book of the Law!" he shouted, his voice echoing off the stone walls. Shaphan took the scroll carefully in both hands. He sat down right there and read through it himself first, his lips moving silently over the words. He knew he had to tell the king. He rolled the scroll closed, tucked it against his chest, and walked quickly to the palace. He went to the palace and bowed before Josiah. He gave his report first. The silver delivered, the workers paid, the wood and stone already being put to use. Only then did he mention the scroll. "The high priest gave me a book," he said. And then he stood up and began to read it out loud. The king listened as the words filled the room. Josiah's face went white. He heard how the people had promised to love God and how they had broken every single promise. He realized that for his whole life, his people had been walking in the dark, doing things that made God very sad. Josiah grabbed his royal robe. With a loud, sharp sound, he tore the fabric in two. "Go," Josiah whispered to his men. "Go and ask the Lord what we should do. Ask him for mercy. I am afraid that the anger of the Lord is burning against us, because we have not followed what is written in this book." Hilkiah and the other men left the temple and went through the winding, busy streets to find Huldah the prophetess. Merchants called out from their stalls as the group passed. Children ran between their legs, chasing each other through the crowd. None of them knew what the 5 men carried with them, or why their faces looked so grim. She lived in the second part of the city. When they told her about the book and showed her the king's torn robe, she did not look surprised. She sat across from them and listened to every word without interrupting, her hands folded calmly in her lap, even as the men in front of her grew more uneasy. She looked at them with eyes that seemed to see right through the walls. "Tell the king," she said, her voice deep and firm, "that the Lord is going to bring trouble on this land. The people have turned away from me and worshipped idols, and I'm angry. The fire of my judgment is coming." The men stood still, terrified. But then Huldah looked at them again. "But tell the king this, because your heart was soft, and because you humbled yourself and cried when you heard my words, I have heard you. You will die in peace. You will not have to see the disaster I am bringing on this place." Hilkiah and his friends walked back through the same streets, past the same merchants and the same children. They reached the palace and told the king every word, exactly as Huldah had said it. Josiah did not hide the news. He called all the people of Jerusalem together, the old, the young, the priests, and the common people. Word spread through every street and every household, and by the time the sun was high, a massive crowd had gathered, stretching as far as the eye could see, filling every corner of the temple court. Josiah stood by the pillar, opened the scroll, and read the entire book of God to the people, his voice carrying across the silent crowd from the first word to the last. Then the king made a promise. He stood before everyone and swore that he would follow the Lord with all his heart and all his soul, and that he would keep the laws written in the scroll. The people raised their voices together and shouted that they would do the same, the sound rolling out across the courtyard like thunder. Old men who remembered nothing like this happening in their lifetimes wept where they stood. Mothers pulled their children close and pointed toward the king, telling them to remember this day. The work started the next morning. Josiah did not just fix the temple. He started a war against the idols. He ordered his men to smash every statue of the false gods, dragging them out of the temple by the armful, the broken pieces piling up in the courtyard until carts had to be brought in to haul them away. He pulled down the altars on the hilltops, sending workers out with hammers and iron bars to break apart stones that had stood for generations. The sound of stone cracking apart, echoing across the valleys. He took the things people had worshipped for years and burned them until they were nothing but black piles of ash. He went into every town, clearing out the bad, until there was nothing left to distract the people from the true God. He sent men north into territory that had once belonged to Israel, into towns far from Jerusalem, tearing down altars that had stood since long before his own grandfather had been born. Soldiers marched from village to village with carts of tools, knocking down shrines that village elders had tended their whole lives, scattering the broken stones into ravines so no one could ever rebuild them. At a place called Bethel, where a golden calf had been worshipped for centuries, his men tore the altar apart, stone by stone, and set fire to the wreckage until nothing remained. He even brought back the Passover. Priests stood in the temple courts and called out instructions to the crowds gathering around them, reading aloud from the very scroll Hilkiah had found, since most families had never once celebrated it and did not know where to begin. Fathers carried lambs through the streets toward the temple. Mothers prepared bread without yeast, exactly as the scroll described, calling their children inside to help. By evening, fires burned in courtyards across the city, the smell of roasting meat drifting between the houses. The whole land celebrated, singing songs to the Lord, just like in the days of old, the sound of celebration reaching every corner of Jerusalem. Hilkiah stood by the king's side through all of it. He watched the temple he had once seen in ruins become a place of joy. He walked the same halls every day, past the same storage room where he had once knelt in the dark, past the same gate where he had once turned to find his king standing there for the first time. The scroll was no longer a piece of dusty trash in a dark corner. It was the light of the whole nation. The king had changed, the people had changed, and the land was clean,